Oh, here I am. Where are you?
I'm coming.
Jonathan. You're Pokey Joe today.
Right.
Pokey Joe. How we doing? Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning is broken.
We are your consecrated hosts.
Brother Jeff.
Jonathan.
How you doing?
Confirmation, baptism, and holy orders.
Holy orders. That's it. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday, St. Charles Borromeo Parish. Happy birthday to us. It is officially today. I don't think a lot of people know this, but officially today is the 15th anniversary birthday of St. Charles Borromeo Parish.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit yesterday with Diane.
Yeah.
But it was July 3rd we mentioned because that was the first Mass.
The first Mass happened that first weekend in July, 15 years ago, but the parish was officially erected and established by Archbishop Curtis on June 16th, 2005. And so that makes today the 15th anniversary of the foundation of the parish. So today is the day that we celebrated as 15 years ago today.
15 years.
15 years. Wow.
Well, and then today, June 16th.
June 16th.
We are now the second half of the last month of the first half of 2020.
Yes. The second half of the last month of the first half of 2020, the year that wasn't.
But it is, and we're
here.
But
it is the year that is. I just read something that said that it has been now about 90 days since we have been in quasi-quarantine or whatever. That mid-March is kind of when things began
March
to
14th, 15th,
contract.
Yeah.
And so March to April, May to June, 3 full months. That is a quarter of the year. A quarter of the year, Jonathan.
And it seems like it's been so much longer, but also not as long.
I know, it's a weird thing. It's like anything. It's like, it seems like forever, but yeah, not really.
I mean,
it's
Christmas.
Crazy.
If you talk about Christmas,
that's just over 6 months away.
And it was just
6 months ago.
But that seems way longer than 6 months ago.
Does it? I don't even remember Christmas.
Exactly.
See? Wow. I barely remember Easter, though. Because it was the Easter that wasn't.
Yeah, it was just us.
It was a quiet little time around here. 15 years ago. 2005.
2005.
You weren't even married.
I was not married.
You were not married. Did you know Genevieve?
No.
You didn't even know?
No, I met her, I think, 2009, 2010.
Ooh, what were you doing in 2005?
I was in college. University of St. Thomas.
Wow, in Houston.
In Houston.
Wow. 2005. I would
have just graduated high school at this point.
Okay. I was teaching at SCOTUS in Columbus.
No, wait, I graduated in 2004. So I was entrenched in college. I was at the University of St. Thomas.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. Lots happened. Lots changed. Lives have... here we are. Lives are here. So Diane was on yesterday.
Yeah, she did great.
It was about time we got her in front of the camera. I mean, she peeked in one time early on and whatnot. But
she was so nervous. She's like, I won't be able to think of things to talk about. I said, it's okay. I'll just ask you questions and you answer them.
She's the face of the parish here when you come to the office. She's the first one you're going to see, and on Sundays often she's around doing her thing.
Or at any event. I even put a picture of John up. So
you knew how, that's her other half there. Good.
Yeah, that duo. I said, without them, I don't know if this parish would run. So
there are so many power duos here that kind of run things behind the scenes that I just don't think we know about, and we appreciate all of you. Especially you lifers that have been here from the beginning. I wonder how many parishioners we have currently who were here from the beginning on that first day.
Even afterwards, looking back and all the nostalgia. And Jackie's been here from the beginning too. They were both, their first Mass was the second week for both of them. For Jackie and Diane. And so afterwards we spent 30, 35 minutes talking
just
about... Reminiscing about just the changes and how Jackie doing religious formation. They had to pack all their stuff in their cars and take it over there every week. Because there wasn't a place to store it.
Yeah.
There wasn't this building. So it was at home. They'd have their stuff at home. They'd put it in their cars, fill up the cars, take it. And it was just a mess.
Crazy. Yeah, crazy.
And so but thank you to all those people there at the beginning who
Absolutely.
had to go through the effort of setting up the church for worshiping.
Literal foundation stone.
Yeah.
Literal foundation
That
stones.
was a lot of work, whereas now
it's still a lot of work.
It's still a lot of work, but it's not that kind of work.
You take it a little bit for granted when you have things. Once you start having things, you start taking it for granted. We're going to talk a little bit about that today when we dive into Dies Domini a little bit. But we never want to take these things for granted, and the people who build the community for granted, good folk.
Yeah. I can't read the comments.
Why not?
Oh, I can see.
Because you have, your computer is not here.
No, I took my computer home this weekend because I needed to actually have like a personal computer.
Sure.
Because that is our home computer.
Okay.
That usually lives here.
And
it is on the counter.
It is there where you left it.
It's where I left it.
Did you actually use it this weekend?
I did use it.
Okay, well at least
so it was at least used. It wasn't one of those things where you put it, take it home, it stays in the bag the whole time.
Yeah, that's often what I do. It's like, I'm going to take this home and I'm going to work on it, or I'm going to read it, or I'm going to do it. And then I'm coming back, it's like, I didn't do what I wanted to do. Oh well, moving on.
Phyllis Brunkin says, do you really want to know? Phyllis, we probably should have you on sometime because we did mention that you are the historian.
The historian.
And so...
Yeah. Phyllis needs to be on here one of these days when I am away, or when you're away, or... Yeah, we need to have a chit-chat with Phyllis.
Yeah.
Have a chit-chat with our deacons. We want to get our deacons on board here too, and so you guys can meet the deacons, but all in good time. We got gobs. The planning that we do for this show... We have got charts and flow charts and books this thick of plans and scripts and things that are happening.
Yes.
Yes, we do. Today, we are going to talk about Dies Domini.
Dies Domini.
We are going to finish this document this month. This is our study for June. So we've got a couple weeks left before the month is over. You said we're in the second half of this month.
And we are... cutting
days
close.
Are going to be, we'll get it.
Because we're not here through that.
But we're about halfway through already, and we're halfway through the month.
But we have...
So we'll do it. Don't worry, Jonathan.
Okay, I'm not worrying.
The Lord is going to lead us through.
Yep, He's going to lead us.
He's going to lead us.
One way or another. It might be kicking and screaming, but He's leading. He might be dragging us, kicking and screaming, but...
Amen to that. Where did we leave off?
Paragraph 44, I think we need to touch on.
Paragraph 44.
So Easter banquet and fraternal gathering.
Yeah. So we ended talking about remembering that the Sunday celebration leads us to the table of the Word, where we have dialogue with God, table of Christ, where we encounter Him and receive the Thanksgiving sacrifice, the body and blood of the Lord, which we just celebrated this past weekend in a particular way. And that paragraph 44 then wants to highlight the communion then, that as we all come together, this is a visible sign of communion. And it's a necessary sign of communion, that church does not happen individually and isolated.
So not communion with Jesus and receiving Jesus.
Right. First of all, this is communion.
Communion.
There is a visible gathering. There's a fancy word for the Eucharist. Sometimes it's called the sacred synaxis. The sacred synaxis is the holy gathering together into one, coming to a single point. So we are coming to the altar. And there's a gathering of everyone. So there's a visible community and the communion that you see. So, and I think that's why the COVID time has been so painful, because it has disrupted the visible, experienced communion of the faithful.
Yeah, we've always been meant to worship together as a community.
Right.
That is what that liturgy is meant to be communal.
That's right. It is meant to be. It is our Father, not my Father, who art in heaven. Christ intended a unity of believers. And so as while worshiping from home and live streaming is as good as some can get right now, it's not great. And it cannot continue. And it eventually has to be brought back to what our worship is all about. And so we express that in so many different ways. The sign of peace, which has been suspended again. It feels so weird not to have the sign of peace, that I'm around all these people and I'm almost kind of sort of not acknowledging them. Peace be with you and with your spirit. And now we're going to move on.
Yeah, and right now we don't really acknowledge other people in the worship space.
I know, you just kind of come in and you're in your little thing and you're all masked and so it's a weird thing. And then of course receiving Holy Communion is the ultimate sign. It not only creates communion with Christ and with each other, but it also is an expression of our communion with Christ and each other. Which means two things. If we're not in communion with Christ, i.e. sin, we cannot receive communion.
Right.
If we're not in communion with one another, i.e. I'm not Catholic, I cannot receive communion here. That expression of communion is a sign of what already is, and then it creates a deeper sense of what that means. So we have to be in communion with each other and with God. And then when we receive communion, it takes us more deeply into that.
Yeah.
More deeply into that communion. Yeah. And so it's important that, and I think this comes back from the 11th century, that the Holy Father made a specific point to encourage priests to distribute to the faithful the communion that was consecrated at that Mass. That the faithful really should receive the fruit of the sacrifice that they participate in. So it's better to... This is why, this is always the hard game, because you don't want to consecrate more hosts than you need, but you don't want to run out of communion either. So you want to create a sufficient amount so that you never have to put back into the tabernacle a whole heck of a lot.
Right.
So that during communion time, you never really have to bring out a whole heck of a lot. That you pretty much distribute the hosts that you consecrate at that Mass.
Back when I was at the University of St. Thomas, it was a small enough, daily Mass gathering that they would actually have the bread at the back, and you took little tongs, and you put the bread, and you put it in...
If I'm receiving communion today, I put a host into the paten.
Yeah, put the host in the paten, and then they bring that up.
Right.
And then that's what and then
of course, nevertheless, there's going to be a guest who doesn't know what they did, and so a host didn't go in, and you run out, and... Yeah.
Well, luckily, it was
always good to have a few
It was a small enough community, that it wasn't...
you could tell. That's good. And that's ideal to do that, to distribute and to receive the fruit of the sacrifice that is offered.
Yeah.
Not that the tabernacle and what's reserved in the tabernacle isn't equally valid or equally, we're talking about what is ideal, and we always shoot for the ideal.
Right.
And so, to receive communion, if Father goes to the tabernacle and brings out the ciborium with hosts in it and distributes from that, especially at a weekday Mass, where we use the host left over from the Sunday Mass. I do that often. The daily Mass is, since it's an extension really of Sunday Mass,
right.
I will distribute whatever is left in the tabernacle so that when we come to that first Saturday evening Mass, there's hardly anything left in the tabernacle, that we consecrate hosts again.
Yeah, and it's another good moment to point out that even when we come, if you are in a state of mortal sin, please do not receive communion, because it actually is more harmful than good.
Correct.
It might be hard to understand that, because it's like, well, Jesus is all good, but you are actually bringing Jesus into something that cannot receive him.
Right.
Like, you cannot receive those graces, you cannot receive anything, so you are externally receiving, internally rejecting, and saying, nope.
Right.
Luckily, with the venial sins, we do a confiteor at the beginning of Mass, which wipes away all venial sins. Now, if you have a venial sin that you do a lot or whatever, it's still good to confess those, even though they're not marked on your soul.
Right.
It's still good to go to confession, because those are good to get rid of too. And
St. Paul speaks about this very strongly when he says, before you approach the body and blood, make sure you discern what the heck you are doing. Otherwise, you eat and drink judgment upon yourself. That if I come in a state of sin, a serious sin, mortal sin, and I say, yes, Lord, come into this, I don't participate in the resurrection so much as I participate in that moment in crucifying the Savior. I put him to death in my heart because of my sin. And so there is the need for reconciliation prior to that.
Sure.
The only case where that would be mitigated is if there was true contrition and you had no opportunity for reconciliation, and it would be a sincere hardship not to receive. That would be the only case where there would be a possibility of receiving communion in a state of mortal sin, where you have the intention to confess as soon as possible because I have not had that opportunity. Maybe confessions were canceled or whatever, and you weren't able to make it to confession. But if it's not a hardship, then you should refrain from receiving, make a spiritual communion, and confess as soon as possible.
The spiritual communion that we've done during the pandemic.
Everyone should know it by heart now.
You should know it by heart. And you can say that and still receive graces. You
Correct.
can still receive goodness. And there's no shame in going up, crossing your arms, and receiving that blessing. If you don't want to be left in the pew
That's right.
and see everybody else go, it's like, oh, he's a sinner.
Right.
Well, you can still go up, receive a blessing, and that's still a good thing.
Yeah, because maybe you forgot your fast and you ate a donut on the way to church. And like, oh my gosh, I should have been fasting. Why did I eat that donut?
Because it looks so good.
Maybe that's why you're not receiving communion that day. Or maybe you walked in late and didn't hear any of the scriptures. And so it's like, I shouldn't receive communion today because I didn't meditate on the word.
So on the other side, you shouldn't judge someone if they go up and cross their arms.
Stop being judgy.
It could be something as simple as...
Exactly.
Oops, I ate some peanuts right before...
I'm not disposed... etc. Okay, communion, important. Equally important, once you are fed, once you receive that communion, it's not meant to be let's all hug ourselves and sit in our pews and just love one another, but rather go out, go love one another out there. Don't just close this love in on yourself. So we receive grace to be sent out on mission. Yes. And that's the point here, that Christians who gather each Sunday, experience, proclaim the presence of the risen Lord, are called to evangelize and bear witness in their daily lives. This is super important. That I think we said that before. That's where the word Mass comes from. It's the last words of the deacon that he speaks to the congregation. Ite missa est. Go, you are missioned. You are sent. And so, of course, people remember the last thing they hear. Missa est. Oh, the Mass. So we're going to call this thing the last thing we heard because that's the way we work as people.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. It says, given this, the prayer after communion and the concluding rite, the final blessing and the dismissal, need to be better valued and appreciated so that all who have shared the Eucharist may come to a deeper sense of responsibility which is entrusted to them.
Right.
And so the Mass isn't over when you receive communion.
Right.
There is still the sending, the commissioning of the disciples saying, go out.
Being sent. I mean, I'm sure we're preaching to the crowd here, but it is almost, I dare say, sacrilegious to receive the sacred host and then just walk out as if it were nothing, as if it were a cracker. And that is not appropriate. It is I need to spend time with my Lord. This is an intimate moment. Imagine if you just spent an intimate moment with your spouse, and as soon as that intimacy was over, you were like, okay, I'm going to go see someone else now. I'm going to just get up and walk away from you. No, this is a time to spend in the loving embrace of the Lord and to just be there and enjoy the nuptial mystery with the Lord. And to walk out on that is exceptionally offensive. I mean, it is offensive. I find it terribly offensive when that happens because it reveals a deep... it's not a love, it's a using. I'm going to use the body of Christ. I'm not going to love the body of Christ.
Yeah. Father Mike Schmitz had a great quote about, with all this pandemic and everything, people are coming back to Mass. It's not the same. It's kind of disheartening because the music's maybe some parishes aren't even doing music. You're sitting away from people. It's not the mass that they
right.
And so he said, if you're going and you're stop going because what you can't get from mass, that it's not about if it ever becomes about what you get from mass, it is no longer worship, it is idolatry.
Yes,
and
that's a good point.
He used it as idolatry.
Yes,
and I thought it was a fantastic way of putting it. That it's not about us. We don't go to church for us.
No, not even for what I get out of it. I mean, that's another offensive thing that I hear often, that I didn't get anything out of it. I don't get anything out of it. It's like, well, I don't care. In a sense, it really is. There are many times I go to Mass and don't get anything out of it, particularly by the second or third Mass that I celebrate in a day.
Or fourth in a weekend.
Or fourth, exactly. Yeah. It's like, I'm not getting anything out of this anymore. That doesn't decrease its value at all. It is about what I give. I am here to give praise, worship, and glory to God, not to be praised, gloried, and worshipped of myself.
Or to receive a cookie at the end for being a good boy.
Exactly. Look at me. I got my food. Got my snack.
Okay.
Think about what the Israelites did when they built that golden calf when Moses was gone. It was all about revelry. I mean, it was an orgy. And I mean, that was the word that we would use. That it was a revelry, it was a party, it was a drunken orgy. There was probably all kinds of debauchery going on down there because it was all about feeling. The worship was not to God, it was an idol. And so it was meant to make me feel good. So if I, and that I think is the same thing, that Mass is not meant, it's not meant to be entertainment. It's not meant to make you feel good. Should it be spiritually uplifting? Absolutely. But that may or may not be felt in the senses of the body.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay.
We go back to the ideally, every time we go to Mass, we will have this huge moment.
Wouldn't that be great?
Be brought to tears because Jesus comes and is on the altar. I mean, ideally, we should all be brought to tears.
Yeah.
Once
if we saw
what was actually happening.
It would make a huge difference. Wow. That leads me to this, the need for the Sunday obligation. And for paragraph 46, I just wanted to read the last paragraph in here, because I think more than anything that we could talk about it, this expresses, even I think in modern days, what we have experienced. In his first apology, addressed to the Emperor Antoninus and the Senate, St. Justin proudly described the Christian practice of the Sunday assembly, which gathered in one place Christians from both the city and the countryside. When during the persecution of Diocletian their assemblies were banned with the greatest severity, many were courageous enough to defy the imperial decree and accepted death rather than miss the Sunday Eucharist. This was the case of the martyrs of Abytinia in proconsular Africa, who replied to their accusers, "Without fear of any kind, we have celebrated the Lord's Supper, because it cannot be missed. That is our law. We cannot live without the Lord's Supper." As she confessed her faith, one of the martyrs said, "Yes, I went to the assembly, and I celebrated the Lord's Supper with my brothers and sisters, because I am a Christian." The fear of death should not keep us away from the Sunday Eucharist. And that needs to be said loud and clear in this time of pandemic. It is one thing to be prudent, and to, especially if we are in danger of infecting someone else and causing someone else's health to decline. But the fear of death should never keep us away from the Sunday celebration of the Eucharist, and because we need it more than we need this life itself. And I read this long tract yesterday just about life in general, and the last quote was from Benjamin Franklin, and it gave me goosebumps when I read it, because it was like, wow, 200 and some years ago, and how true it is. Those who would sacrifice their liberty for the sake of a little bit of safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. That we cannot give up that which makes us truly free. And as a nation, we need to remember that, but even more so, as the people of God, we need to remember that.
Yeah.
People died for the Sunday Mass, and there is a need to stir that back up into our hearts, that this is more important than life itself. This is more important than life itself.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I can say that strongly enough.
We don't, we are so blessed, maybe blessed, to live in a place where we can worship freely.
Sure.
But when you look at all of
But even in these last months, those freedoms have been taken away from us.
They have.
And I don't say that lightly or condemnatorily, because there's a lot we don't know about the pandemic and how the virus spreads and being prudent and everything. But there's been a lot that's been taken away, and we've let it.
Right. And but if we look at all the stories of a lot of martyrs who have gone and had to fight to go just to receive the Eucharist, and it's, even going to underground churches, or the threat of just going to church, you would get killed for going.
For going.
The faith in those people was so strong, and we haven't had that adversity. Yeah. I think there were churches that, I don't know of any Catholic churches here in Omaha, but
sure,
that still congregated during the pandemic. The worst thing that happened would be a slap on the wrist, not death.
Right. Right.
And it's just like, we don't have to fight for our faith.
Now. Yet.
Not yet. But, we don't have to fight for it, and that makes us, in some ways, weaker. And we do, college students, they have to fight when they get to college, but we don't equip them well enough sometimes.
Right.
We don't have the support.
Right.
And so, Lord, help us to be strong when that hour does come. That if we are ever presented to having to fight for our faith, that we will say, I will die in order to receive the Eucharist, over compromising any of my beliefs, any of what I hold true.
That's what the word martyr means, witness. And I was so inspired, and I think we've talked about that here, even in the beginning of the whole pandemic, the approach that St. Charles Borromeo himself took to the pandemic of Milan in the 16th century, ? That he was fed up with his priests, and he was like, for the love of God, you need to sacrifice your very health and life to bring the faith to your people, to bring the Eucharist to your people, to bring this, to be with the sick, to be with them. Stop thinking so much about this life and start thinking about the life to come, because if you don't demonstrate that it's important, then it probably isn't.
No. It
probably isn't. And those are hard words to hear, because fear, I think, more than... The world is motivated, I think, by only two things: fear or love. And it really does, whenever we act, we step back, or whenever we fail to act, we have to ask ourselves, did I act or fail to act out of love, or did I act or fail to act out of fear? And then that involves deep soul searching. What kept me from, or what made me go out and do, or what did this, or what did that? How was my love activated, or how did my fear grind me to a halt, or stop me from doing what was right, or not doing what was wrong? Those are the two motivating factors. I think those are the most powerful motivating factors in the way human beings relate to one another, either out of love or out of fear. And I think that it really does become something very, very serious for us to think about. And it surprised me as I read paragraph 47. You and I were talking about this before we went on camera today, that the church, it wasn't until 1917, only 100 years ago, that the Code of Canon Law first time codified the obligation to attend Sunday and Holy Day Masses.
So it wasn't a written obligation.
It wasn't a written obligation for
1917.
1900 years. Because from the earliest times, people would die rather than miss Mass. I mean, it was so strongly ingrained within them, particularly living under persecution. Yeah. It was like, this defines who we are. We've got to go to Sunday Mass. And if you didn't, well, then you just weren't Catholic. You just weren't Christian. I mean, it was just that easy. And it wasn't until the year 300 that we see the first obligations begin to be written, but they weren't written as obligations. The Council of Elvira. Do you know that song?
I don't.
Oh my goodness.
So you just look like a crazy person.
Everybody else knows Elvira. Which speaks not of obligations, but of penalties if you missed Mass, especially after 3 absences. I want to know what those penalties were. If you missed Mass 3 times, what kind of penalties? So what the church did in 1917 in the Code of Canon Law was it took all of these local obligations and penalties and put it into the universal law because, as it says here, people forgot how absolutely important Mass was. Half-heartedness and negligence kept people from the duty to attend Sunday Mass. Half-hearted and negligence. And I think that's when you don't live in, when it's too easy to do something, sometimes it's easy to set it aside.
Yeah, I told this story at the beginning of this pandemic about the guy who lived in, I believe, China, where he had to fight for his faith to go to Mass. He had to sneak around and get to the Mass. Came to the United States, within 3 years, was no longer Catholic.
Right? Because it was too easy, and therefore... Now, I'm not saying that we have to suffer and be persecuted in order to thrive, but you will notice that the church has always flourished from the blood of martyrs. That who was I listening to recently? Some preacher, some bishop, some priest, I don't remember who, but they were talking about that the church, we cannot forget that the church is going to be hated by the world. And if the church tries to be loved by the world and nestle up to the powers of the world, then the church has forgotten who she is. And I think I'll say it out loud, I think there are a number of bishops and priests and laity who are more concerned about the politic of the world, the powers appeasing the state, and creating a political whateverness, utopia, rather than proclaiming the gospel. That we would be rather on the right side of politics than on the right side of the gospel.
Yeah,
I am all full of opinions today. My goodness.
I saw, a quote, one quote, and I don't know the back half of it, but the blood of the martyrs is something of the church.
The seed ground.
The seeds of the church. And then I heard a priest once say, or maybe not a priest, saw it somewhere, that said, if Jesus preached what most of the homilies are today, he never would have been crucified.
Yeah, he wouldn't have been crucified, and nobody would have followed him, because it's rather lackluster, and it doesn't move me to deep faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's when something becomes so accessible and easy to do, we take it for granted. We take our family for granted a lot of times, our friendships for granted, because, they're always going to be there. The church is always going to be there. So
the God is always going to be there.
When the next diagnosis comes, then I'll go back to that's when I'll go back to church, because that's when, and it's like, it doesn't work that way. For some people, they try to make it work that way.
We don't realize what we have until we've lost it. And that's a sad testimony. I mean, that happens a lot, at funerals, or, when you grieve the loss of anything. Something goes away, something disappears, something is torn down, something whatever. And it's like, we didn't really know what we had until we lost it. And we should never want to get to that point. No. We need to know what we have and what goodness we have, and to celebrate that. And so I think paragraph 48, just to kind of wrap us up today, really talks about how the Lord's Day should be a time for prayer, a time for works of charity, a time to refrain from unnecessary labor, that really requires the community support. We cannot do this on our own. Right. If I try to do it on my own, I may be drawn down by fear, because I don't have the support of my brothers and sisters. I'm not going to grow in love, because it's kind of hard to love in isolation. You need someone else to love in order for love to happen. So that the power of the Christian community is so necessary and so important for the flourishing of the Christian life. Prayer, works of charity, rest, to give our worship to God. These are important things.
That holy day, that Sunday, is a great time to look back and appreciate your family and your
to give
friends.
Thanks.
And give thanks for all of those.
Not to have to lose them in order to appreciate
right.
them.
And it's just a great time for appreciation of everything, all
Yeah.
the blessings that you have. And even more so for people, I think it's a great opportunity to reach out and say just some kind of word of encouragement or anything like that. We talked about it at some point during this as well, just reaching out. But make it just a habit of letting people know how you feel about them on Sundays. Express the gratitude.
And express the appreciation.
Because the eulogy at the funeral is not a great time for it.
That's true. And I think that's when we try to make it up, because I didn't say all of those things as much as I should have when this person or that person was alive. And so even with our faith, Sunday becomes the time to look back and say, I have to thank Jesus Christ for the great gift that he has given me, his body and blood sacrificed for my sins so that I could live. Do I really appreciate that?
Yeah.
All right, there's a bunch to think about today. Whew! We're on fire.
I'm pumped for Mass today.
I've got a meeting that I think I'm late for, so I need to go. Have a good one.